If you want to follow along, the first lengthy verse we're going to be coming to is Colossians chapter 1. It's going to be in Colossians chapter 1. And as you turn to that passage, I want you to start visualizing for me Jesus on the cross. He is alone. He has been stripped of all of his clothing. He is covered in blood, dried blood. His body has been beaten beyond recognition. His disciples had abandoned him. The crowds are jeering at him. You are accursed by God, because cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree. His enemies are laughing at him. You saved others, yourself you can't save. If you are the chosen one of God, come down from the cross and we will believe you. The only physical evidence of his dignity, his garment, the soldiers had taken. And at the foot of the cross, they're casting lots for it. He had no crown. He had no robe. He had no throne to sit on. He had no castle to live in or a palace. He had no army gathering around him to save him from his fate. He had no one to advocate for him, declaring that he was innocent and he did not deserve to be hanging on a tree. His body, although bones were not broken, his body itself was broken down. And yet, his spirit remained intact. He does not beg. He does not curse. He does not lash out at those who mock him or spit back at those who spit at him. Instead, he says, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they are doing. This is Satan's ultimate attempt to strip Jesus of all his dignity. And yet that picture you have in your mind, that image that you have there of Jesus on the cross, is the most dignified picture of all time. There has never been a moment or a time where someone had more dignity than Jesus did in that particular moment. Because his silence was not weakness, it was strength. His suffering was not defeat, his suffering was our redemption. His nakedness wasn't just shame. His nakedness was laying bare and open his love for the entire world to see. So how can we say that Jesus looked dignified in that moment when every single physical sign and symbol of dignity had been stripped from him, and he looked like a mess to human eyes? He looked accursed by God as he was there. Because in order to understand what dignity is and how Jesus clung to that dignity, we have to see it at that moment. And that's what I hope to do with you today and maybe the next few times as we go through. This has been eye-opening to me as I've studied this. So I hope it's eye-opening to you, and it brings our minds around Jesus as we remember what he did in that moment for us. So we first have to define what is dignity. Some people think dignity is defined by what you look like, what you wear, how much money you have, what are the external signs that you are a dignified person, maybe even by your actions. But dignity is really our internal, our intrinsic value. It's who we are. And it is so closely associated with our identity that the two cannot be separated. And so if we can hold to our identity as Jesus did, no matter what people do to us, just like no matter what they did to Jesus, can our dignity ever be taken from us? The seed of dignity is our identity. And then what happens after our dignity starts to grow, it starts manifesting itself in the way we behave. The manifestation isn't the dignity. The dignity is underneath the surface. It's inside. It's our internal value that we have based upon who we are. And this is the foundation goes all the way back to Genesis chapter 1. In Genesis chapter 1, when God created man, he gave us our value. What did he say? You have been created in the image of God. That's where our value is. And if we hang to that value as Jesus hung to the value that he had from God, then our dignity can never be taken from us. Psalm 8 and verse 4 says, you've made him a little lower than the angels, talking about man, yet you've clothed him, crowned him with glory and honor. That's who we are, and being made in God's image. If you apply this to Jesus, we see two elements of this. First of all, Jesus had a perfect dignity and that he was a man. He had that image, that dignity that we have as being created in God's image, but on the other side, he's also God. And so he has the dignity, the identity of being deity. That's where I want to pick up in Colossians chapter 1 and verse 15. Colossians chapter 1 and verse 15. We'll read verses 15 through 18. Speaking of Jesus, it says, he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things consist. He is the head of the body, the church, who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead. For in all things he may have the preeminence. And then verse 19 says, it pleased the Father that in him all the fullness of deity should dwell. All the fullness should dwell. So here we have Jesus, identified as human, made in the image of God. Identified as God because he was before all things and he is God. John talks about that in John chapter 1 as he's recording. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And in verse 14, the Word became flesh and dwelt among men. So in order for Jesus to cling to his identity, hold fast to his dignity, he had to be firmly grounded in who he was. And the same is true about us. But why is this so important? It's important because you as an individual person and Jesus, we always act out of our dignity. The dignity, the identity is the source of our actions. And so Satan has to try to get us. He has to get at our identity. That's the only way he can do it. He has to separate us from our identity, which is in God. And if he can separate us from God, he's got us. There's no way that we can hang to our dignity or hang to anything else if we have been separated from God. And to show you how Satan works this, Satan can go about this many ways. He can attack us directly at the source of our identity and say like he did to Eve, God is not worth identifying with. See, God's not telling you all the truth. You're not going to die. He's lying to you because he knows in the day that you eat of the tree, you're going to become like him. He doesn't want you to become like him. Don't identify with God. He's not worth identifying with. Or he's going to make it seem so difficult, identifying with God so difficult that you're going to say, it's not even worth it. So that's sort of what he's trying to do at the cross with Jesus. All the shame, all the humiliation, all the suffering, all the insults, to get Jesus to sort of from this angle go back and separate him from God. So he has all kinds of tricks and tools to do this. People do this. Think about Joseph. When Joseph was taken into Egypt, what did the Egyptians want to do? What did they need to do for Joseph? They needed to make him an Egyptian. And so, as a matter of fact, all the external things that made him a Hebrew were taken away from him. When his brothers came later to meet him, there were no signs of that left because they knew that in order to get him to rule over Egypt effectively and have Pharaoh's interest at heart, they have to separate him from this Hebrew lifestyle and even the Hebrew God. And one of the ways that they do that is by erasing all these physical things that link him back to the Hebrews. They do the same thing in Babylon when they bring in Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. What are they trying to do? Erase every physical attribute of being an Israelite And if I can make it hard by putting you into captivity and all of this, of being an Israelite, I'll get you to stop identifying. So with them, they change the way they look, they change the way they dress, they educate them in all the ways of the Babylonians, teach them to speak the Babylonian language. So in other words, separate them from all these things that would link them to being a child of God. And if they can do that, then maybe they can make them start thinking that they're separated from God and start worshiping the gods of the Babylonians. Now, we know that that did not work with Daniel, it did not work with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but that was their attempt to do this. So the world has an issue with our dignity and how it relates back to our identity, because the truth is that every single one of us, because of sin, we stopped identifying with God. And as painful and as bad as it makes us all sound, it's true. We decided to identify with the devil. And when we did that, because of our sin, it had a double effect. The sin then, what does it do? It separates us from God. It starts pulling us further and further away from God, so that our identity and who we are, our essence, our value is no longer associated with God. It's associated with the devil. This is what he tells the Jews, right? You are not of your father Yahweh, you are of your father the devil, because you sin, you lie, you don't tell the truth. You're following after him now. And since every single one of us got rid of our dignity, because we got rid of we stopped identifying with God and started identifying with the devil, God sent Jesus to this earth to restore our identity back to God and to give us even a greater identity. So think about this as a moment in time. Jesus is coming to this earth to restore all of our identity and link us back to God through reconciliation. Satan didn't want that. He wanted the total opposite. And so he knew while Jesus was on this earth, this was mission critical. He had to separate Jesus from his Father. He had to separate Jesus from his identity. And if he could do that, he would not only have Jesus sin against God, he would ruin it for the rest of us. Because after we've sinned, we could no longer reconnect to God without Jesus coming to die for our sins. So this was a very, very critical time in history. And Satan knew this. And so he spent all of his time trying to figure out how I can separate Jesus from his Father. And if I can do that, I'm going to win this battle. It's checkmate. And his attempt was there over and over and over and over and over again. So let's look at a few things. Turn to Matthew chapter 4. Matthew chapter 4. See, if you can convince someone that their value is zero, then they will not fight for themselves, because there's nothing worth fighting for. A lot of times people use this to manipulate other people. If I can humiliate you, embarrass you, separate you from who you are, where you don't think who you are has any value to it, then I can treat you however I want. You're not going to have any opposition to that, because you've lost your value. You no longer think you're valuable, and so you're not going to fight for yourself. So if Satan can convince us that God is not worth identifying with, he's got us, like he did with Eve. Or if he can convince us that life is easier or life is better if you stop identifying with God and you start identifying with me, then he has us. And like I said, he had many tricks to do this. He can do a direct shot, or he can try to make your life so miserable that you'll say it's not worth hanging on to this. With Jesus, I think this is very interesting. He takes the direct shot first. After Jesus is baptized, look at Matthew chapter 4. He doesn't take the trying to make Jesus suffer and trying to humiliate him, trying to embarrass him, all this stuff first. He goes straight for the kill shot, if you will. In Matthew chapter 4 and verse 1, when Jesus is in the wilderness to be tempted, it says this: Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, afterward he was hungry. Now when the tempter, the devil, came to him, he said, if you are the Son of God, command these stones to become bread. So what's he doing? If you truly are who you say you are, if your identity is being the Son of God, then prove it to yourself and prove it to me right now. We know Jesus didn't bite on that. There's no way I'm doing this. I know your tricks, Satan, and it's not going to work. In verse 5, the devil comes back and tries it again. The devil took him up into a holy city, set him on the pinnacle of the temple, and said to him, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he shall give his angel charge over you, and in their hands they shall bear you up, lest you dash your foot against a stone. So again, if you're the Son of God, he's directly attacking his identity. If I can get to your identity and I can prove to you that you're not the Son of God, or if I can cause you to do something that disconnects you from God, I have won. And then in Matthew chapter 4, he goes to the point of, not only I want to separate you from God by being his son, if I can get you to worship me instead of God, I've done the same thing. I've accomplished it. Matthew chapter 4, verse 8. He says again, the devil took him up on an exceedingly high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, all these things I will give you if you fall down and worship me. In other words, it's better to identify with me. It's better to worship me because I can give you more than God can give you. I can take away the suffering and I can give you the physical things that you want right here and right now. So I find it very interesting with this idea of identity and dignity that Satan goes straight to the heart of the matter at the very first encounter. But that didn't work. And so he sends his minions, his servants, to attack Jesus in so many ways, trying to get him to deny that God was his identity. See, if Jesus never loses sight of who he is and why he came, Satan has no shot. So what he does in John chapter 8, he gets the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the religious elite to insult Jesus by questioning the legitimacy of his birth. It's just a small line in verse 41. He says, we were not born of sexual immorality. Jesus, you're not worth anything. You were born in sexual immorality. Question his identity. Who am I? Who am I? That's what Satan was trying to do. If you look at Mark chapter 3, we have another instance where his family says, Jesus is out of his mind. So you were born in an illegitimate relationship. You're not who you say you are. You can't be. You're crazy. And then they say to him, you are possessed by a demon. See, all of these were much more than what they look like at the surface. And this is what has been sort of exciting to me this week, to see these things. They were much more than just temptations. They were striking at Jesus and his identity. Because Satan knew that's the only way he could win, to separate Jesus from God. So turn to Mark chapter 14. Mark chapter 14. I want you to get this picture back in your head. That the world would say, that does not look very dignified to me. He has no external signs of being dignified. But Jesus clung to his dignity because he held fast to his identity and his mission. He never lost sight of this. And we'll see how many times the devil tries to do this at his death and his life going forward. But I want to look at this one just to make this point. Mark chapter 14. When Jesus was first arrested, they tried to get all these people to accuse him of things, and they couldn't get their testimony to agree. It says, and the high priest stood up in the midst and asked Jesus, do you answer nothing? What is it that these men testify against you? But he kept silent and answered nothing. Remember, silence wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a sign of his power. It was control that he had there. Again, the high priest asked him, saying to him, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? That's the money question. If Jesus hangs on to this and Jesus isn't going to back off of this, the devil can't win. And so what does Jesus say? I am. Jesus is confessing the same thing we confess before we're baptized, right? He is confessing, I am the Son of God. I am the blessed one. I am the one that came to die for everyone's sins. Then Jesus said in verse 62, I am, and you shall see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power and coming in the clouds. Though many tried to shame Jesus, humiliate Jesus, embarrass Jesus, show him to be a fool, show him to be a fraud, through all of that, he never lost his dignity because he never stopped identifying directly with God. He knew who he was, and he knew why he came. As we prepare to take the bread and the cup, I want us to reflect on this idea that Satan tried to strip Jesus of his dignity, but he held on to his dignity and his identity for our sake. And he went to the cross not just to endure his shame, but to carry our shame so that we could be restored to our true identity. Not just humans made in the image of God, but Jesus did so much more for us when he gave his body up. Because now our source of value is that we are no longer enemies of God. We have been reconciled and we are his friends. We are no longer sinners separated from God. We are saints joined to God. And we are no longer hired men, or we are no longer just friends. We are adopted sons of God. So this week, as we remember not only Jesus now, I want you to think about him all week long and this idea that Jesus held fast to his connection with God to secure our connection with God. And so if we're securely connected to God, what do we talk about? We're going to live in a dignified way. And make that our aim as we remember Jesus. Not just remember what he did, but remember what that means to us. That's what biblical remembering is, remember? We talked about that? It's not just thinking about something. It's thinking about what Jesus did, what that means to us, and what that means to us going forward. So we live our life connected to God as sons, as his children, as his saints, in his family, because of what Jesus did in that moment on the cross, not forsaking his Father and clinging to his identity and his dignity. Oh, if you want to read more something about this, if you go to John chapter 10, Jesus remembers that he is the good shepherd and he remembers what he came to do.